I hope you enjoyed the first part on sewing with buckskin, just covered the basics. Another thing I want to cover right now here is how to splice different pieces together. And so say, we're working with the running stitch like I will show you yesterday, in and out, in and out. So you end up with a pattern, just a simple pattern like this. But you have still a ways to go to complete your project, and you only have a tiny little head of your buckskin thong here. So what do you do to have a smooth transition? And so what you need to do is to cut out another thong. And that's, actually another example of where it really can be helpful to have some extra length in general. So for a running stitch like that, I was saying, take just slightly longer than the piece of buckskins that you want to sew together. But if you have a longer piece of buckskin, that's fine. You can always cut it later. It's always better to cut one piece later than have to add a bunch of small pieces together. And so, sometimes when I have a very long seam, like my pant legs, maybe, 3 feet long or whatever, I just cut extra length and I just, pull everything through, and so that I don't have to splice small pieces every time. Okay, but back to splicing. It does happen that sometimes you have to splice things together. And so, you prepare another thong, exactly the same that we did yesterday. You just poke a hole at the end of this one. And then what you do is that you take the end piece here and you thread it through the hole of your new thong. Just like that, and you pull it all the way through, and then you're gonna have to put a hole through the headpiece there, what's left from the previous thong. And you can do it the same way as you poke the hole in your new piece, just with an awl and punch a hole there. The thing is that I don't know if I mentioned that yesterday actually, but it's always a good idea on your tail to just keep like a thicker piece so that it's easier to just punch through without tearing the hole. But now that you're, kind of at the end of your piece, you hadn't planned that you were going to stop just right there and have to splice. And so, this piece of buckskin is not any wider than the rest. And so it may not be very easy to punch a hole exactly at the middle that's not going to tear. And so what I usually do for that is that I take a little knife and I'm actually going to cut. So I'm going to punch a hole, but it's going to be a directed hole. So, with the blade of my knife, I just put it in the middle of the thong. And then I can direct the hole, in the same direction as the length of the thong itself. And so my hole, instead of, taking the risk that it's going to tear on the sides, now it's going to err towards tearing on the length side. But that's okay because we still have plenty of length. And so once you've just put your little knife mark in there, you can easily poke your hole through, your awl through the hole, and then you just stick the new piece, so the new piece is already threaded onto the old piece, and then you get your new thong and thread it through the old thong, and you pull that through all the way. There you go, and it should lay fairly flat. So, there you go. So you have, the tiny little bit here that you could cut off if it's really irritating for whatever reason. But, otherwise it lays flat with the two pieces interlocked together. And then, you can cut the old head off right there. I'm not going to do it right now because I'm going to reuse this thong, but you could cut that off, and then you just keep on going with your new thong, you know, in and out and in and out for the running stitch. And so that's it for the basics. Now I want to talk about some different stitches that you may want to do. Let me undo that so that I can reuse them. So the running stitch is fine. It's very easy. It goes pretty fast, and you know, that's a nice stitch as far as stitches go. But you may reach a point where you may want to become a little more fancy with your stitches, and actually, you know, tend to do that quite a bit now to kind of vary things and decorate a little more. And so the next stitch that I'm going to show you is called the French twist, and that's actually the stitch that I have here. And so, you know, it just kind of looks like a twisted rope, you know, on both sides here. And I think it looks pretty cool, and it's actually a very strong stitch. And so, you know, I tend to do that stitch, want to make it pretty anywhere, but also if there's some pieces that I really want strongly held together, you know, because it's pretty much gonna triple the strength, I'd say, of the regular running stitch. And I'll show you why. And so yeah, that's what we're gonna do right now. And it's actually very easy. It just takes quite a bit of more thong though, so you may want to have a thong that's 4 times the length, at least 4 times the length as the length of the buckskin that you want to sew together. And that's something that you're going to do as an overlap stitch. And so you overlap, you know, anywhere from, you know, 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. You know, you definitely want to make sure that you're going to punch through both pieces together, you know, and you want to feel the other piece of buckskin on the underneath here. You don't want to nick just the sides of the buckskin, because otherwise the hole will tear. You want to keep the size of the overlap even the whole way, so you know, really feel it with your fingers, know where the edge of the bottom piece is, and then you can punch your holes. And you know, I pre-punch those holes just so that you don't have to look through that, but just like I said in the previous video, you know, about 1/3 of an inch apart, really punch through them with your awl. And then when all your holes are punched in, you take your thong, just like I showed you, has a hole at the other end, just so that we can tie it together without a knot. And then we start on the underneath. It's always a good idea to start on the underneath, because then you can hide. You can hide where you tie things together. And so you start there, same thing, just thread through. Okay, and you leave, you know, a tail that's about 1/2 an inch or so. And then back on the front side, you open up your second hole. I hope you can see pretty well here. And thread through the second hole. And then on the other side, like before, you're just gonna pull the head through the hole in the tail. There you go. And for that, so you know, we did a welted seam last time, and we pulled our stitches tight to have that wavy, you know, look to it. With the French twist, we don't do that. we keep our stitches flat and our pieces of buckskin flat. We don't want to pull them too tight. And so, that's the way you start, kind of the normal way. But then, instead of keep on going down your line, you actually go back through the first hole. And so you use your, awl again to kind of create more room. And then thread it through. And so you come out, the second hole where we had the stitch before. Oh, sorry, you come out through the first hole where we started. Yeah, that's what happens. And then, so now you have, your first, so that was your first hole. You went down the second hole, you came back up the first hole, and now you're going to go down the third hole down the line. So open it up. Down. So you're gonna have an overlap here between the first stitch that was small and then the second stitch that covers two spaces now. And then you flip back, and then you're gonna go back through the second hole. So that's where we started, that's the second hole, that's the third hole that we just came out of, and now we create more room in the second hole and go up there. And so that's where it's very important to keep the twisty appearance, that you always come out the same side of your previous stitch. And so now I'm gonna come out on the left side here. For me, it might be the right side for you, I don't know, but for me it's the left side here of the previous stitch. So I come in the middle of the previous long stitch on the left side, and now I'm gonna reach for the next open hole. There we go. And again, you just pull it flat. There's no wave to it. And then on the other side, same thing. You go back to the previous hole, create some room with your arm, and then you come back in the middle of the previous long stitch on the left side, and then again just reach for the next hole that's open. And on the other side, you go back up the previous hole. Oops. Actually helps to have a bone awl here, because it's not as sharp, and so it tends to go back the previous hole already without wanting to drill a new hole through the buckskin. Alright, and then also see, when I came back up, made a mistake. I came back on the right side of that thong, and so I just have to thread it back to the other side so that it's on the correct side. And there we go. So, and then you just keep on going the exact same way, and then you end up with that twisty stitch to it. That's really nice. And on the other side, that's what it's supposed to look like. It's like a continuous stitch, like if you have your basic running stitch, it goes in and out and in and out, so you have a stitch, a space, a stitch, a space. But if you do your French twist right, then it's a stitch, a stitch, a stitch, a stitch every step of the way. And so you can see how, that makes it a very strong stitch. It's because, you always go back where you always came from, and then you have a continuous line here. And so that's a very nice one to learn. It's very easy, and I think it's very beautiful. And so now I'm going to show you some other stitch. Okay, so the next stitch I want to show you is the X stitch, and it can be a fairly beautiful stitch as well, with those little crosses, X's along the seam. And you can, use it in two ways. One, with an overlap. So, this piece of buckskin is actually underneath this one as well. There's an overlap of 1/2 inch or so. And so the X's, go through both pieces of buckskins. You also can do it with just one side of the X on both sides of the skins, and then the next side of the X's on just this one side. Depending on what you want to do, it doesn't really matter how big of an overlap you want. The second thing that you might be tempted to do is to actually bring two pieces together. And so you can see that if I stretch them a little bit, there's actually a gap, so there's no overlap there. So you can use those X's to have no overlap. It's not the best though, because on the other side, let's see, on the other side it leaves kind of a lot of open space. So it's not the best stitch to use to really bring two pieces together with no overlap. But it can be done, We'll do the baseball stitch later on that does bring two pieces together with no overlap a lot better. But, you can also use those X stitches. You can have more of an open side. So, this is like a summer shirt that I have, and the sides are open, and it uses the X stitch as well. Just that has a lot of gap, for airflow and breathability. And so, those are kind of the different ways in which you can use that stitch. And I'm going to show you how to do it now, because, I'm still working with the same pieces here. Even though I said that it's better to have an overlap. So, if you do overlap, here's the thing that I'm going to cover. If you do overlap, you need 2 rows of stitches side by side. So, here I would have to feel, like I showed you in a previous stitch, where the edge of the underneath piece is, and then, I do one hole here and then one right next to it. And so then you end up with 2 rows of parallel holes. So that's what you have to do if you're going to do an overlap. But again, here, just because I'm working with the same scrap pieces, I'm just going to do it as if I wanted the 2 pieces to come together with no overlap. But that will be the only difference, really. Overlap, 2 rows of parallel holes. Otherwise you actually end up with 2 rows of parallel holes as well, but on different pieces. But otherwise it's the same. And so what you do is that you start in one hole the same way as you would, previously. You just thread through till you end up with 1/2 inch with your hole at the end of this one. But then you are going to go across the holes. And so, here I have my parallel holes. This is what I can come out of. There's a hole here, and then across from it on the other side, there's the other hole. And so I'm going to go down that one. Open it up. pull. And so, you know, you always have to keep in mind that you're gonna have to do an X. And the way it's gonna work is that we're not making X's right now. We're gonna make, you know, kind of zigzags right now, and then on the way back, we're gonna make zigzags in the other way to complete the X. You know, but the important thing to keep in mind right now is that you come out of this hole and you go across to the next hole. And then on the underneath side, and so on the underneath side, of course, you always want to kind of secure your thong. So I'm gonna do that right now. Just thread my head through my tail. There you go. And so then on the underneath side, you don't go across. You know, you go as if you were doing a running stitch. You go to the next one on the same side. Like so. So, you know, we're on the underneath, came across, came back up, and then go to the next one. And so, you know, when you get started, you just got to make sure that everything is well aligned. And then after a while, it's going to figure itself out. So, you know, we're out here on the next hole. And now again, you know, when you come up a hole, you reach across in diagonal to the next hole. So I don't know if I said about this, but you're going to need about at least 3 times the length, if not 4 times the length for this one. And so, you know, again, so we had our first diagonal stitch here. We went underneath along the same side, and then we came back up and across we reached like an X. And then again, we go on the underneath side, open up the next hole on the same side, just like a running stitch. And then when we're up, we're also going to reach across in diagonal. And so here you just need to pull your stitches, you know, just tight enough that the 2 pieces meet. You know, there's no wavy thing going on. You don't want them super tight. And so, you know, here, so we have one diagonal this way, one diagonal this way, one diagonal this way. And so now let's say that's the end of what I want to do. And so when I flip back over, instead of keep on going down my seam, if I want to stop here and I want to do the other side of the X's, then I'm actually going to jump across, but not in diagonal this time. Just jump across to the other side. Like so. And then here you can see that I just came out, you know, on the other side of the last kind of diagonal piece that I did. And so now I can jump across in diagonal to complete my first X. So there you go. And now on the other side, you know, you do the same thing. You just keep on running along the same edge on the other side, on the same side I mean. There you go, and flip back over, and you find yourself, you know, where you need to be to complete the next X by going across and in diagonal. Here's your second X, then I'll do the last one, across again, flip on the other side, and we just run along the same side. There you go, and now we can complete the first X where we started by jumping across in diagonal. Okay, so pretty nice. And you know, when you reach the other side, you can just tie a knot. You know, when you end, there's really not much you can do except just tie a knot. Just try to make it not too bulky. You can actually flatten it a little bit by pounding on it if necessary. But yeah, that's it. And so you see on the front side then the X's, and then on the other side, the way it's supposed to look is that you have, you know, a row of running stitch, so in and out on each side, you know, except at the end of the line where you just jumped across directly, but otherwise, you know, stitch, an empty space, a stitch, etc. So that's it for the X stitch. Now let's do another one. Okay, so the next stitch I want to cover is the baseball stitch, which you might be familiar with if you've ever seen a baseball. And so that's a very useful stitch if you want to put two pieces together without any overlap. So, you know, this is a shoulder seam, and it comes nicely together just by being brought together by the baseball stitch. So that's a good one to know. And so I'm going to show you that right now. And so for the baseball stitch, you want, kind of like similarly to the previous one, two rows, keep on making that mistake, 2 rows of parallel holes. And so, you know, I have my one row of holes here, and exactly matching it to my other row of holes on the other piece of buckskin. And again, we start with buckskin thong, but this time there's no need to put a hole at the end of your thong, because we're actually going to double over the thong and go, you know, through each side of the buckskin. And so what we want is to go up from underneath. And so we're starting on one piece. There you go, about halfway through, and then the other piece, same thing, open up a hole, go up it, and then you pull so that, oops, there we go, so that the two pieces of buckskin are nicely together, and you have about the same length of thong on both sides. And so the trick to remember with the baseball stitch is that you never go down a hole. You know, in previous stitches we went up and down holes, but this time you always go up holes. And so to be able to do that, you're gonna have to squeeze underneath the piece of buckskin. So if you take the thong on the right side and you go underneath the left piece of buckskin, and so if I switch over, just can't punch my hole, so I go underneath and up the hole across. Again, it may be, slightly difficult to get started and get things aligned, but once you get going, you can always adjust things. And so, that's the way it looks like. This piece of buckskin went underneath, this thong went underneath this piece of buckskin and came up this hole. And now with this one, we do the same thing on the other side. We're going to go underneath the right piece of buckskin and go up the next hole, like so. And you just pull somewhat tight. There you go. And so that's kind of the way it looks like. And now, you just keep on going like that. The only trick is to always do the same side first so that you have a consistent pattern. So, right now the second one that I did comes over the first one that I did across. And so you want to keep that pattern. And so now you just keep, that's the last piece of thong that you use coming across here. And now you're also going to go underneath and across the next hole and come up. And now with the second piece of buckskin, you go also underneath and up the next hole. Pull tight. So, again, you get the same pattern. So this one was over this one was over this one. And so again now, with the same piece of thong that you were just holding, go across, underneath, and now the piece of thong in the back, also across, underneath, and up. Okay, so that's it. That's really the way you just keep on going to the end. And on the other side, the pattern is pretty much the same, just little baseball stitches. Okay, so that was the baseball stitch, and now I'm going to show you one last stitch, kind of the most difficult one. Alright, so almost at the end, I'm going to show you one last stitch, and it's kind of the most difficult one. It's very beautiful and very time consuming, but it's very nice, especially when you want to conceal overlaps. And so this is kind of a back pocket, it opens right there, and so this is just one piece that's on top of the pants, and here's the stitch, and it's called the herringbone stitch. And for that, you're going to want to use a thong that's at least 6 times longer than the seam that you want to stitch up. And I'm going to show you now. And so, just like we talked about as a possibility for the X stitch, you're going to, if you're going to have an overlap, you're going to want to end up with 2 rows of parallel holes. But because of the overlap, the piece of buckskin on the underside will just have 2 rows of holes. And then the one that's going to be on top only has 1 row of holes, and they're going to lay on top of the underneath piece, like so. And so it's going to be a little tricky to get started, but once you get started right, then it gets easier, and you can have kind of your own little mnemonic device to remember how it goes. And so, right now, so here is our starting piece. I'm going to start in the second hole in the piece that's overlapping. So this one, not the first hole, but the second hole. I'm going to go through both pieces of buckskin. Again, I'm using a thong with like a hole at the end so that I can tie it together without making a knot. So there you go, I'm going up through a hole, through the second hole in the overlapping piece of buckskin. And then I'm gonna go back across in diagonal to the first hole in the other piece of buckskin, the one underneath. Let me open this up. Okay. Go. So there we go, I'm back across from here, back in diagonal, and on the other side, I'm going to link up the tail of my thong here. Okay. And now, so I just went back across here, and now I'm gonna go one to the side. So it's the first hole on the other side. There we go. Okay, so now back in front. So I had my first diagonal stitch, went underneath to the other side. Now I'm back up. Now I'm gonna go across to form an X. So across in diagonal to the next available hole. Go. So now I have a little X going. And now I'm going to go back to the previous hole. So, you know, on the same side, back through where there's already a stitch. Okay. And so now I'm back at the start of my X, and now I'm going to go across to the other side to the next available hole. So that's going to be, you know, kind of a big jump, but it's the next available hole on the other side. Go. And then now it's the same pattern. We just go back one stitch on the same side. So create some space here. Thread through. Turn back over. And now same deal. We're going to cross to the next available hole in a diagonal. But on this side, it will always be a short jump, you know, just one across in diagonal. From the other side, we pretty much went two across. It's still the next available hole, but it's the bigger jump than from this side to this side. But still, it's always the next available hole. So once you get started right, you know, that's kind of the pattern that you follow. Is that when you're underneath, you always go back the same side. So back up the same side. Like so. and then across in diagonal to the next available hole. And on this side it just happens to be a big jump, whereas on the other side will be a small jump, but still the next available hole. So again, underneath, back, up, the same side. And then on the other side, oops, go down across the next available hole. So, the most difficult part, again, just to get started, that first start, so you can rewind and really get a good feel for how it starts. But once you get going, after those first couple of weird things, it's always on the other side, on the underneath side, back, up one on the same side, and then, oops, kind of went on the wrong side of that stitch somehow. So back up, and then across to the next available hole. And then we'll go back on the same side, etc., etc. And so, on the front side, you start getting your nice herringbone stitch. And the way it's supposed to look on the other side is 2 continuous rows of stitches. So in a way, it's very similar to the underneath side of the French twist, except that now we have 2 rows, but it stitches the whole way down. Alright, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed this basic tutorial. We covered basics about sewing with buckskin. We covered 4 different stitches to decorate. And I hope you enjoy. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave comments in the comment section, and I'll do my best to answer them. So until next time, good luck.